Hey. Oh, I can't hear you. Hold on.
No, I was muted.
Oh,
Hi.
you're unmuted. Okay. I'm like, what did I do wrong? Hold on one sec. Um,
You want to make me a co-host? Or if you
Yeah.
did.
Cool.
Hey, Anisha.
Hey, David.
Hey,
How's it going?
David.
Oh, hey. I'm just grabbing some food real fast. I'm gonna be on mute.
No problem.
No worries. I forgot that we are also dealing with arts and culture DNS as well.
They're doing it. Like it'll
They are.
only have to be once they've approved it. Will it come?
Okay. Okay, so we're not really going to discuss that tonight then.
No.
Okay, good.
And Jim will be on, and he will sort of do the framing of the district needs.
Okay, cool. That's better.
Hopefully, other people join.
Alistair's here. Hey there.
Okay. Megan, you're like big on my screen. It's the little boxes.
So
I don't know
huge.
why.
You can change the view.
It's okay.
Yeah, I don't want to be big.
Oh, now, Anisha, you're big.
You can,
I wonder how I.
if you go to
Sorry.
the top where it says view, you're under speaker view, and if you change it to gallery, then you see all the boxes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. How's everyone?
Okay. Yeah, we're good.
Good.
If you're just joining the meeting, I just wanted to remind you that this meeting is being recorded. And if you are not a committee member, if you could just write in the group chat, which is directed to the host only, just your name and what affiliation you have, whether it's a group or if you just live in the neighborhood. Hey, Laura.
Hello.
Hey, Andrea.
We'll give everybody a few more minutes to join. Hey, Richard, how are you?
Hi, Richard.
Hi.
Hi. Ben, could you email Moses and see if he'll join soon? You guys will probably go first. Mm. Megan, do we have I think with Herman, we probably have enough people.
Um, yeah, we're good.
Okay.
So just one more reminder, this meeting is being recorded. If you're not a committee member, if you could just type into the chat box your name and the organization you're affiliated with. The chat is just used if you have any sort of technical problems, or if you want to sign in, or if you want to speak, the chat can be used for that. The chair is going to announce each agenda item and when it's time for the public to comment. And when that happens, you can do the raise hand feature to get the chair's attention. And other than that, if you could just stay muted until you want to speak, that'd be great. Thanks.
All right, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. We are probably going to go a little bit out of order because we're still waiting on a few people, but we can go ahead. I'll go ahead and ask if there are any comments to the minutes from, we didn't meet last month, so March. All right, so there are no comments or changes to that. Megan, if you want to go ahead and do a roll call to start the meeting, or, get
Sure.
attendance.
Anisha Stephen,
Here.
Megan Joy. Here, are we voting on the minutes from last month as well? So
Oh, okay, sure.
be a
Yes.
yes, yes. Alistair Economakis. Where'd he go?
Yes, sorry.
Oh, yeah,
sorry.
yes. Andrea Gordillo,
Yes.
Herman Hewitt,
Yes.
David Louis,
Yes.
Alexandra Militano, Richard Ropiak,
Yes.
Rodney Washington, Andrew Comey,
Yes.
okay. Minutes from last month are approved, or last meeting, sorry.
Thank you guys all for meeting on a Monday this month. I know we are in a different time slot than usual, and that there is full board tomorrow. So I'm going to try to keep this meeting relatively short, so that we don't have to spend all of our evenings on community board things this week. We are going to start with a conversation with two special guests. We were going to have three, but now we're two. Moses Gates and Ben Thigpen. I'm very excited for both of them to be here and talking to us. We, over the past year and during COVID, have talked about how we can support economic development better in our district. I think for most of that work, it's really been around small businesses. And one of the committee members asked for us to take sort of a bigger picture view of economic development and our city more holistically, and then also connect that to issues that the community board can address or can be involved in, and also, you know, pinpoint more issues that are we're directly seeing in the community board 3 district. So I will let Moses and Ben introduce themselves, and then I'll ask some questions and then open it up for everybody to talk. So Moses, why don't I throw it to you if you'd like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Moses Gates. I am work for Regional Plan Association, which is a nonprofit 98-year-old civic urban planning organization that works throughout the tri-state region. We're starting to plan our centennial, though, and we might do that thing where we advance our birthday and call ourselves 100 years old a little in advance. Excited to be here. Sad Lena can't join us, you know, who's one of my favorite people, but she is off in sunny Florida on vacation, and it's not fair to make people talk about land use on vacation, is what I have learned as an urban planner.
And Ben, please introduce yourself as well.
Well, I disagree about land use on vacation. That is a vacation for me. But my name is Ben Carl Thigpen. I am a real estate broker and landlord or investor. And I do business throughout New York City, including in Community Board 3, commercial and residential. And I'm really happy to be here and looking forward to an interesting conversation.
Great. And Lena, who was going to join, was Director of Policy for Association for Housing and Neighborhood Development, ANHD, Neighborhood and Housing Development, yes. And she did send me some notes, so I will also share those as the conversation progresses. So I asked the committee to send me their sort of top concerns for both the city and the district as a whole. I've shared those with Moses and Ben. And to frame a little bit about, again, what our committee has been doing, we are the Economic Development Committee. There's another land use committee in CB3 and also a committee that works on housing. We have primarily focused on issues of small businesses and particularly retail diversity in the district. I think that's one of the key issues that we think about. And I think we have focused really hard on that, but as you all know, that is an issue that is, one, both hard to solve, and B, you know, sort of hard to solve with the levers that the community board has. So that's sort of part of this discussion is, you know, where can we be thinking about how we plug into broader conversations, how we think about workforce, how we think about land use differently. And I'll start with the question, or I guess I'll read the issues that folks shared with their concerns. And for the most part, the citywide concerns were the same as the district level concerns. And that was equitable schools and education, cleaner, accessible public transportation, homeless services, quality of life and safety issues, affordable housing, and specifically housing for seniors, environmental resilience and disaster preparedness, recovery and workforce opportunities, specifically for the district's cultural workers and small businesses and retail diversity. I think during the pandemic, we have seen that, we had someone from the Center for Urban Future come and speak to us about unemployment and sectors in the Lower East Side, East Village, Two Bridges, Chinatown. And I think because of our concentration of retail and hospitality, and particularly small retail and small businesses, bars and restaurants, under 96th Street, we had the highest unemployment during all of the pandemic. We've had some of the sectors that have been the hardest hit, and also small cultural institutions. So what are the top three for each of you of issues that the city is facing as we are perhaps, coming out of a pandemic and moving into recovery? Moses.
I will try to tackle this small, this small question. I think that the biggest issues coming out of, coming kind of out of this particular pandemic and into the recovery are, how will this recovery not be like all other recoveries? And I think we've gotten into a really, cyclical pattern over the last 40 years of, a growth cycle that first benefits the very wealthy, and if it goes on for long enough, starts to benefit lower income workers also, but only at the very tail end, followed by a recession that costs lower income folks a lot more money than higher income folks, and you follow along. I mean, the short story is like, costs rise for low income folks in expansions, and then income falls for low income folks in expansions. And then you just get growing inequality from it. So in this expansion, the question is how do, the biggest issue is how, do costs not rise for low income folks, instead income rises for low income folks, and how do you develop an economy where that happens? The second one is public health. I mean, I think there's, everybody is now very focused on public health and its effect on kind of the economy and everything like that. And, I don't have a particular single point for it, but it's, it's the thing that's different about this one, I think, a little bit more than other ones. And then the last one is the stickiness of remote working and how that affects Manhattan. And that's a lot of what, at my work and a lot of urban planning firms are just trying to game out. Like, the general trends of employment and, transportation patterns and housing, the base things stay the same. Like, people have a home, they have a job, they go from their home to their job. You can kind of figure stuff out based on that level. Right. And now it's like, is that really happening anymore? And it was a little bit trending that way before the pandemic, and how much has the pandemic accelerated that? And then what does that mean about, our economy and transportation patterns? Does it, I'm going to throw out some like big things that please don't quote me on, because they're not really like super orthodox planning rationales, but it's like, you have an entire transportation system whose function is to funnel people into the central business district. And if that is not the pattern of work anymore, what does that mean? Right. So I think that's the third thing.
Ben?
So I take a slightly different approach insofar as I think the pandemic really exposed and accelerated a lot of existing dynamics that were present in our city. One being the continued collapse of retail in light of changes in consumer behavior and the internet. Two, we've been using policing to cover up our insufficient social services, insufficient inappropriate social services, and that has really been laid bare. And three, we are an incredibly segregated and inequitable city, and that manifests itself in our health outcomes, our educational outcomes, and our and our housing outcomes. And I think to the degree that a community board can be helpful in addressing them, I think there are ways that a community board can address all three of those issues in its own way, short of actual legislation or ability to appropriate funds.
So one of the questions that one of the committee members had sent in their comments, and I think one that we, pre-pandemic, we had been thinking about how we attract daytime businesses to the district, right? And now that the retail landscape has changed and the office landscape is changing, do you think that businesses are leaving New York City? Do you think they, how there's been chatter about businesses leaving? Do you think that is true? Do you think if businesses aren't leaving, are they looking at different places to be, different neighborhoods to be in, rather than, I think East Village, Lori said we were hoping to attract them here. But is that still the case and a viable path for us?
What do you mean by businesses?
I think more office. I think there's the overwhelming feeling, I would say, of a lot of community members is that there's a saturation of a few types of businesses, right? Particularly bars and restaurants in this neighborhood. And if we're thinking about diversifying business, retail, whatever it might be, how do we have things that are not bars and restaurants and or just all the other types of things? Like if we want businesses that are open during the daytime, services, I guess. If we actually wanted to, I live on Houston Street. We have like an office building coming next door on Houston. We have the tech hub coming, right? If we're thinking about employing people in the neighborhood in different types of jobs, where should we be thinking about that?
I mean, the office question is interesting, and there's kind of three different metrics that you can look at for it, and only one of which, two of which are very relevant to the real estate industry and the business community, and only one of which is relevant to kind of the neighborhood.
Right.
The first one is spatial occupancy. Like you have you have an office building, it's at 85% rented capacity. The second one is, well, actually two of which are relevant to the neighborhood. The second one is kind of, I would say physical worker capacity. So, you have an office, everybody was working 5 days a week. Now remote working goes to 3 days a week. You probably are occupying the same amount of square footage. You might be able to negotiate a better rent, or you might futz around with it a little bit, but it's not cutting your expense, it's not cutting your rent by 40% because, it's not like somebody's working 3 days at the desk and then somebody else is working 2 days at the desk and they fight over it the next week or what have you. So that's, and then the third thing is just the knock-on activity all of that generates. A law firm might be able to tell their legal associates they have to come back to the office, but they're not telling their clients that they have to come into the office to sign documents that now they're used to doing remotely.
Right.
So that's that's the thing I would say on a neighborhood level is even if you have high occupancy on paper in an office building, you have to draw the people, not just the businesses. And if there's an office building near you that says we're leased up at 90%, that's not the question to ask as a neighborhood. The question to ask as a neighborhood is like, how many people are going in and out your door every day? What is the job density, and to try to find the businesses that have that. And those might be service businesses, during the day. A yoga studio is going to have more people going in and out than than a real estate office or something like that. So I would find ways to try to focus on attracting those type of office uses. You know, and it's a little bit circular because the way you attract those type of office uses as a neighborhood is to have good retail amenities. And, you know, you have good retail amenities. And, you know, the second thing you can do is provide the type of spaces that those businesses work in. You know, if all you have as a neighborhood is storefront, you know, for commercial space, you're going to get things that use storefronts. If you have, you know, like the tech hub that's being proposed on 14th Street a little bit, I think that's a little bit outside your community board. That's a different type of office space and is going to attract a different type of clientele and is going to diversify your neighborhood a little bit. So that's
Yeah.
what I would say.
So,
Tech Hub is in our community board.
Oh, it is? Oh, I thought it was like a block outside. Okay.
It's in it.
So I going off what Moses said, I think generally speaking, office follows retail and residential. You know, retail, right before the pandemic, Community Board 3 was really starting to see a really nascent office renaissance with new construction, you know, everywhere from Houston Street to even, I think there's a couple sites on the Bowery where office is being constructed. But that's because the community board has become a very desirable place to live. And to Moses' point about the type of space, there's plenty of office space in Community Board 3 already. You know, I live down in Two Bridges in Chinatown. There's plenty of office spaces down here. They're just mostly filled with, you know, gambling dens, which you know, are harder to lease to a tech startup. But I think really the key is retail and taking a more expansive look at it. So, for example, in the building next door to the one where I live, a retail business just opened that is a combination motorcycle garage, cafe, gallery, and bar. There's not that much foot traffic on this street, but they have a different use for each time of the day, or each day of the week. And I think we should encourage a lot more of that. Zoning can be helpful in this regard. You know, back in the day, the Lower East Side was filled with industrial businesses, retail spaces, as opposed to restaurants. I think just really what's happening. Anyone else getting that feedback?
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, I think activating the street, getting more people coming to this neighborhood for whatever services they are, is the key, and everything else will follow.
Got it. So what do we think about, you know, we have a lot of existing small businesses, mainly bars, restaurant, hospitality, etc. We have seen things close during the pandemic. We saw a lot of things close prior to the pandemic. Lena did point me to the fact that that storefront vacancy survey that the Department of Finance had been collecting did release their first data set. So I can send that around to everybody. What's the best way to sort of, you know, if we're looking to incentivize entrepreneurship, businesses to come here, especially businesses that serve a wide variety of needs. I think, you know, Ben, you live in the neighborhood, and we have some of the highest income earners in Manhattan and some of the lowest income earners in Manhattan. How do we, you know, incentivize retail that meets a wide variety of needs? Is, you know, someone had proposed some sort of rent stabilization. Is that sort of the pathway forward to helping small businesses in the neighborhood?
My opinion is no, but I think that might help some small businesses, particularly incumbent small businesses. I don't think it would have any impact on the prices they charge their customers, but I think a big step, and it seems like the community board is taking a step in this direction, is making people a little less scared of doing business at Community Board 3. Like having done some retail leasing in this community board before, I had, or rather not doing business in this community board, I had restaurant clients, bar clients that have said to me, we're just not going to look at Community Board 3. I know it seems like you guys have a lot of bars and restaurants, but as a result of having that high saturation, it became very difficult to get permits for sidewalk cafes or liquor licenses or even beer and wine. So creating a more hospitable environment would certainly be great. But I think the biggest issue for starting these businesses, particularly businesses that serve people with less means, is access to capital. And you know, you could give out space for free. Like there's incredibly cheap space in Community Board 3. Like particularly in my area, there's very little foot traffic down here. The retail space is super cheap. You could rent, the apartments rent for more than the retail, which is very unusual. But unless someone has the access to capital to, you know, start their business, do any build out they need to do, it's not really going to move the needle. So, you know, to the degree that the community board can help advocate for small business financing schemes, you know, perhaps provided by the city, that I think would go a long way.
And then a question for you, Moses. It's one of the things that this committee had. And then a question for you, Moses. It's one of the things that this committee had. Sorry, there's a delay, I think. Sorry, there's a delay, I think. Can you guys hear me?
Is that me?
Yeah.
I can hear you.
It's back. I'm going to mute myself.
Yeah, we could hear you. There was some sort of feedback delay thing going on though.
Okay. So we had talked about this on this committee before, was the eviction moratorium. Sorry, the eviction moratorium.
Hold on. Let me see if I mute everybody else and just have, can everyone else mute who's not speaking? Okay, you go ahead now, Anisha.
Thoughts on the eviction moratorium and how this will impact residential small businesses? What do we think the actual effects will be when, I guess, any sort of restrictions are lifted in that?
I mean, you know, at the end of the day, there are four different entities that can take the hit for any back rent or anything like that. And those, you know, four entities are.
Hang on,
tenant,
sorry, Moses. We can't, sorry, Moses.
Hang on, sorry,
Moses. We can't,
No.
sorry, Moses, it messed up. What do you think that is, Anisha?
Is that me?
No, I don't think it's you. I think everyone's having the issue. Somebody.
It's clear now, though, Megan. Like if you speak, I can hear you okay, and I assume you can hear me okay. It happened with Anisha. Okay. Moses, if you speak now. Anisha. Moses, if you speak now.
I'm speaking now. Am I doing all right?
No. Okay, let's try this one more time.
No.
Everyone go on mute except for Moses. Everyone go on mute except for Moses.
Now is it working? Okay. This is why everybody is going to go back into the office, is you know, because of things like this. You know, I would say for for the eviction moratorium, what I was saying is there's, you know, four people or four entities that could take the hit from lost rent. There's the landlord, the tenant, the government, and the creditors. You know, and those are the only four entities, maybe the utility companies or something like that. Those are the four major entities that are going to have to, you know, figure it out. And so you have to think of the relative, you know, both needs and abilities of those four entities. Right now, everybody is trying to figure out a way to make the government, you know, make everything up, you know, financially. What I think will, and with not a lot of conversation on the creditors and not a lot of conversation on the landlords, and a default understanding that it is the tenant's responsibility, you know, which it may be legally, but I think, you know, in this particular circumstance, a lot of folks are asking the question of like, is that the proper public policy? You know, as an eviction moratorium kind of comes to a close, the backlog is such and the court system is such that it is going to really take a long time, you know, to move everyone through the system if you wanted to move everyone through the system. And there's an ability to kind of negotiate. The tenant could say, you're not going to get a court date for 7 months. Let's figure something out. The landlord would then go to their bank and say, look, my tenants are, I'm not going to be able to do anything with my tenants, help me out. And they'll all go to the government and say, we need a program to help cushion this. And so, you know, that is kind of the optimal scenario, is forcing, you know, everybody into a position where they have to negotiate in good faith over, you know, rent arrears, over conditions going forward. And, you know, if you would ask me, I would say, you know, it's the job of the government to kind of strengthen the tenant hand in this, to have them know their rights, to, you know, probably provide legal services, and, you know, to provide a little bit stronger hand in figuring this all out, because they're the folks with you know, the least options in general, and the least capital, and the least ability to, you know, effectively absorb, you know, a big financial hit. What I think is really difficult is when you try to, you know, create a one-size-fits-all program for how this works. You know, and address it in terms of finances, like send in your paperwork and we'll pay 50% of it if you're under X income, and like things like that. And it's a much better idea to try to give everybody the tools to be able to negotiate effectively and to protect their own interests while they're negotiating. So I think it could go one of two ways. I think if the government kind of takes that tack, it'll be kind of a slow easing out of the system, especially if tenants have guaranteed legal help in these circumstances, which they are more and more through kind of the right to counsel bill. You know, it'll mean, you know, effectively, you know, landlords and probably the banks at the end of the day, you know, are forced to kind of make some concessions. If the idea is, you know, the eviction moratorium is kind of stopped without that support, I think what you will see is generalized chaos, and the generalized chaos will create winners and losers based on luck, you know, and it'll just be 100% of the kind of thing where, like, you know, everybody gets a notice and the court can handle 10% of the notices a day, and 10% of the tenants kind of get screwed. And 90% of the tenants go to court and they say, we can't handle you today, go home. And the tenants, you know what they're doing, go home. The tenants who don't know what they're doing, have a landlord tell them that means you have to get out. You know, it'll just be like generalized chaos. And, you know, I think that's kind of the worst case scenario. But unfortunately, I would, you know, put slightly good odds on that happening.
I largely agree. I would add one other party to the list of parties involved, which is insurers. I guess they're sort of a creditor, but I think insurers have a major role to play, particularly with commercial eviction. But generally speaking, I think this is going to be a much bigger problem with residential eviction than commercial. We've cut deals with basically every sort of have. Basically, what's happening in broadly, getting a vacant space after an eviction is really not that attractive. So a lot of landlords I know, although certainly not all, are working with their tenants to keep them alive, so that they're going to have a tenant when things open back up, because it's not easy to lease vacant space at the moment.
I'll open it up to any committee members if they have any questions.
Yeah, hi, it's Andrew. So one of the things we've heard recently is that the impact of the open restaurants program on eating and drinking establishments and the impact that is going to potentially have on attracting daytime retail. Because if landlords know that they can basically get free space in the street or on the sidewalk to rent to a bar or a restaurant, why would they rent to, I don't know, a candle store or a bakery or something like that? So I'd welcome some perspective on that. I know it was critical for restaurants and bars during the pandemic, but the making of it permanent, I think, is going to have a real negative effect on non-eating and drinking small businesses, as well as being able to attract non-eating and drinking small businesses, because we've basically given landlords free public space and an incentive to rent it to eating and drinking establishments. So,
I'd first say that I don't think we know what permanent means at this point. I think it's unlikely that the city's going to keep letting landlords and their tenants use this space for free. I think that there's a good chance that the city starts charging for it. As for its impact on non-restaurant or bar businesses, I think a lot of those businesses, rent is not really their problem. I think they have other problems that they're contending with, and I'm not sure that open restaurants being, a competitive use is necessarily the reason that these dry uses are not opening. I live, as I mentioned, down in Two Bridges, and there's plenty of dry use space here that's vacant, that is dirt cheap, that's not getting leased up. I would love to have a restaurant in there, but right now there's just nothing.
The other thing I would say is the business is using. I think I'm on a lag. The other thing I would say, as in New York City, is businesses using public space outside of their storefronts is like a long and harrowed tradition. You could go to Orchard Street and see all the clothing outside on the sidewalks. You go to any clothing store in commercial strip on the boroughs, and there's racks of clothing outside of the outside of the storefront. So I think it's not just bars and restaurants that kind of like encroach into the sidewalk space. It's really a lot of, it's a real New York kind of thing. And it's a lot of different businesses. And as an urban planner, I am a big fan of this. Like, I think breaking the kind of like strict wall between public and private space along the storefront is good. And, the other thing it does is it makes the inside of the stores feel a lot more welcome and kind of creates a lot of connectivity between the street and the businesses. And I think is kind of like good for everyone. From a more retail oriented perspective, or, if you're kind of thinking of, you're kind of thinking of it in terms of it gives restaurants a competitive advantage for rentals, and it is, it is public space and it is being used for free, same as a parking space or what have you for public use, or same as a busker in the park, collecting tips. You can also think of it that way. My answer to it is to ask how other businesses can also effectively use a little bit more public space with, I would also say with the appropriate caveats. And those appropriate caveats might be, you should pay extra to the city for the privilege, and I think that's fair enough. But I would just mostly point out it's like far from a bar and restaurant thing to use a sidewalk for your business.
Alistair?
Thanks. I'd just like to add to that, the space wasn't given to landlords to make money. The space was given to bars and restaurants so that they could try to continue their businesses as best they could to when the pandemic was occurring. So it wasn't a benefit to landlords. It was something that was given to make tenants be able to survive. I'm sorry. And finally, I think at the end, the city's going to be taxing and charging fees on the sidewalk space, and we'll be making revenue on sidewalk cafes. So I think the revenue that's generated there will circle back to the city in some type of tax revenue. And I think it should be open to other businesses as well. So I just want to clarify, it wasn't given to landlords so they could make more money. It was given to the commercial tenants so they can try to survive.
Yeah, that's Alistair. That's not what I said. And I said it was a great program temporarily during the pandemic. I said moving forward, if a space is vacant and a landlord knows that they can rent that space and have additional space, that business can have additional space in the street and on the sidewalk, then what incentive do they have to bring in a business that's not going to have that? They can conceivably charge a higher rent because that space is now rentable to them. So
Yeah.
that's the
No.
point. It's not that it went in the landlord's pocket. I know that it went in the business's pocket to survive.
Right.
But now moving forward, I think landlords can capitalize on public space to attract more eating and drinking establishments. So it's one man's opinion.
Yeah. Well, if they open it up to other businesses too, that would be a benefit. You know, if it's a clothing store, clothing store should be able to have there's possibly a sidewalk display too, I guess, to make it fair. It's just a thought. Thank you.
Alistair, did you have any other questions?
Sorry, me, Anisha? I did, but when they all went crazy with the feedback loop, I forgot my question. So I'll come back later.
Okay. Richard?
I was curious about Mr. Gates' comments about the traffic coming into Manhattan. And I'm assuming that there would be a flow down from Midtown Manhattan, going up and down, including us. Regional planners had a history over the decades of being interested in the port, in terms of the airports, in terms of the rail system. And I'm curious what role that they think that crime in the rail system, whether it's New York City Transit or the commuter lines, what role crime will have and in the subway of affecting the number of people who can possibly be interested in coming back into the city. I don't think regional planners ever addressed that, or if they have, I've missed it.
Sure. I mean, like inbound crime in the subway is totally different than actual crime in the subway as reflected in, comp reports. And there's always stories you hear about.
Hold on, wait. I think we should, Moses, it seems like everyone's breaking up a little bit, but yours is the worst. Can you possibly try to call it? Maybe if you called into the meeting instead? Do you want to try that? Oh, Jim is saying maybe try without the video. Oh, thanks, Andrea.
Is that better? Can you hear me now? Okay.
No.
I would.
It's no better.
My chat is disabled, but I chatted to you, Megan, the phone number where Moses can call in.
Oh, hold on, let me send that to him. Thanks, Andrea. Message to Moses. Okay, Moses, I just sent that to you. See if that works better.
Okay.
We should make sure Moses is muted too, otherwise we'll get more feedback.
Oh, okay. And I'm assuming I'll see him come in as a caller.
Should be.
Okay. Oh, need meeting ID. Hold on one sec. Sorry, Moses, hang tight.
I just sent it to you, Megan, also, if you're trying to dig it up.
Thank you.
No problem.
Andre, can you just chat it to everybody? Like, so Moses.
She can't be,
can't.
maybe
Oh.
because it's only the chat has to be only host. But I guess I could do that, right? Then I could do that. Hold on.
Yeah, you should be able to chat it to Moses.
I just did to Moses and I can actually do it to everyone here. In case that's the meeting ID and let me get okay.
Did I make it?
Oh wow, you sound great.
All right, look at that.
Yeah,
I mean, to
thanks.
answer the question about crime, there are two different things. There is actual crime as reflected in statistics and CompStat and things like that. And then there is, high profile reporting about crime. And sometimes those two things track each other and sometimes they diverge. Right now we're at a moment where the kind of like high profile reporting on it is not tracking the reality. And, I'll say that very clearly. If you look at the statistics, crime in the subway is not at the level of 1979. It's not even at the level of 2003 when, I loved riding the subway and I think many people did. It's had a lot of high profile reporting, and I think the high profile reporting is done, kind of with an eye less towards, good public policy and more toward with an eye towards, a political fight. It's the kind of thing where, I think number one, you definitely have crime effect kind of planning and planning rationales. And there's a whole kind of genre behind, how do you have effective planning to get eyes on the street to try to get less crime and things like that. We're engaged in a little bit of a design initiative right now around the new Port Authority bus terminal, and a lot of the conversation we're having around the Port Authority is how you do it in a way which doesn't, which daylights streets, which doesn't create kind of like unsafe corridors and things like that. So I think there's a big urban planning rationale to play there. I think that the biggest thing that prevents crime on the subway is having robust ridership. When you have a lot of folks on the subway and you're not the only person in a car by yourself worried about who might come in, I think there's a real kind of like safety in numbers issue when you're riding the subway. And, one of the biggest things is to try to get ridership back on track. That's the largest thing that'll kind of help restore us to, a good, robust subway system, along with, things like proper maintenance and running the trains on time and all like that. But I would, very much say, take your crime information from the CompStat reports. Don't take your crime information from the New York Post, and do kind of planning accordingly based on, bad information.
I hear that, Mr. Gates, but I live in Manhattan. I live in Community Board 3. I do not live in Jersey, Westchester, or Long Island, where I am being urged to consider starting to commute back into the city. When the public perception, and you're right, it's what the media makes of it at the time. I need regional plan and others to help overcome that so that you do get more people coming into Manhattan. Right now, I don't see anybody doing that.
Moses, take that back to your bosses and make sure that you overcome the perceptions for us.
There's only so much a humble urban planner can do to counter, stories in the media.
All right, we can just take one or two more questions if anybody has anything else. Jim, I know you had your hand up, and Alistair, if there's any other questions from you.
Yeah, I'm happy to defer to committee members, but if so Alistair could go ahead.
Okay, we'll go with Alistair and then Celestina.
Sure, thanks. First of all, thanks Moses, and thanks Ben for coming here, and sorry about all the technical issues we've had, because I would have liked to listen a little bit more carefully to some of the things that were said, but I think I got most of it. From what I've seen as a lay person and spoken to businesses that have left the city, I've seen several issues in what have been barriers for or causes for businesses to leave, because I've had tenants that pre-pandemic left the city. And I started seeing a decline of, I guess, commercial rents or tenants leaving. I mean, I had a tenant just leave a restaurant fully with, everything in there, and said, I'm just moving to Texas. That's a true story. Initially, it was the regulatory environment for businesses was extremely onerous and extremely difficult to navigate and expensive to deal with. In addition to, taxes, minimum wage, etc. But more so on the regulatory environment, the cost of a tenant to go into a commercial space and renovate it and pull all the permits that are necessary, and now there's a lot of permits that are needed, is really expensive. 20 years ago, it was a handful of, $5,000, something like that. I mean, you're talking thousands upon thousands of dollars and a lot of time spent in just the permitting process in order to renovate a space and get the required licensing to do so. And then once you do have the space, you do have the city going around and giving a lot of violations. As a landlord, we have been hit tremendously by the city recently on violations for facade work, or cracks in the facade, which all buildings have. It seems a little bit like the Wild West at the moment. So I see the regulatory environment being a hindrance. I see crime and quality of life being a hindrance of kind of, it's not very inviting for people to come back in. And obviously, you still have the big institutions that haven't opened up completely for businesses. I mean, we do have a loss of population in New York City. It's caused our rents to drop about 20 to 30%. It's coming back, but I don't know how back it's going to be. And my feeling is we have to make it more a lot easier for businesses to start up and make it a lot more attractive for businesses to come into the city and start up. And I was wondering, Moses and Ben, if you're in agreement, disagreement, if you think that's right or wrong, if you have anything else to add to that.
No, I think it's exactly right. I think the question is what are the actions you take to be able to do that? I think, you hit a lot of it on the head when you kind of talked about the inspections and the city being a little much, at times. We do a project where we talk to other global cities around the world about kind of like their what's happening with them and what's going on with them in the pandemic. And in Hong Kong, and this is kind of strange because it goes against what's happening there politically, but in Hong Kong, the city completely stopped enforcing any type of retail, permitting and stuff like that during the pandemic. And all sorts of pop-ups just started to kind of like pop up in all of those, kind of like malls in Hong Kong. The landlords liked it because it just kept the little bit of foot traffic and things like that going for them, and it didn't totally kill their mall. And the city let it all go. And it's a really interesting, and it's everything from like, the equivalent of SAT tutor prep to somebody selling cookies to, everything in the world. And it's only able to happen because it's a particular moment when the city decided not to, the city decided that it was more important to have activity than to be sticklers for the rules. I think something like that here could be really beneficial. I think that happened last summer to a large extent. There was not, a lot of enforcement last summer in terms of a lot of different things. The question is what this summer will look like and how much will the city go back to being, sticklers for the rules, how much they should go back to being sticklers for the rules. I don't want to say it's not important, health and building code saves lives. But it would not be a bad idea for the city to kind of like take a hard look at what is the stuff that saves lives and what is the stuff that doesn't, and really kind of, adjust accordingly in terms of the enforcement.
The only thing I'd add to that is I think it's important to make a distinction between business owners and landlords. Landlords are obviously businesses, but I think that the beautiful thing from a public policy perspective about property and property tax is that property cannot move. There's plenty of violation arrears that are piling up on commercial and residential buildings that the city does a terrible job of enforcing, and I don't think that's preventing anyone from coming back in. And the other thing I would add, or rather, and I think the regulatory environment on small businesses is very bad, and to that end, or in that vein, I think we need to keep in mind that to some degree, New York City sells itself. And we've spent a lot of time and unfortunately a lot of tax dollars subsidizing large businesses to come to New York City or stay in New York City, and not enough doing that for smaller businesses, or rather channeling that capital in a more productive way that would encourage these smaller and stickier businesses that are not just going to move on to another city that gives them a better tax break.
Celestina?
Yeah, hi. So I'll reflect what other people are saying and reiterate my thanks to Mr. Gates and Mr. Theipen for speaking with us today. And also thank you to CP3 for organizing these meetings. This is my first meeting that I'll be attending with all of you, and I'm very excited and grateful. I do have a question though, which is kind of a broad question. So if we're not able to touch all of the different thoughts that may come to both speakers' heads, that's absolutely fine. But I would love to get a little more, I guess, to touch base on the thoughts about Mr. Gates's predictions about the potential for the generalized chaos with mass evictions. As a representative goals, we are a organization that largely represents clients in NYCHA developments. So it's definitely a concern for us that these mass evictions may start taking place. And of course, it would hit our clients really hard because our clients are predominantly poor people and people of color, immigrants, and people who don't always have the means to protect themselves, unlike some of these commercial tenants who have some more resources So I would just be curious about Mr. Gates. I'd like to hear more, I guess, about your thoughts on those predictions and maybe what you think the role of nonprofits might be. I know you said that you thought the government would take a major role in that, but that we definitely can't put all of our eggs into that basket, I don't believe. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as an urban planner. Thank you.
I can try, and I want to stress, I don't really like prediction is a strong word. I have some thoughts, and they may or may not be right. But I think the biggest thing is, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Commercial tenants have both the wherewithal to kind of and understanding to force the rest of the parties into a negotiation. And this is the wrong word, but just kind of like the culture of commercial landlord-tenant relations is one in which, like, if a commercial tenant goes to a landlord and says, I know we signed a lease, but I can't afford to pay you, so let's talk. It's like not weird, it's taken as like, oh, it's just business. Whereas, like, you and I and your clients and anybody else who's ever rented an apartment in Manhattan know that if you go to the landlord and you say, yeah, I know we signed the lease and I owe you rent, but I can't pay the rent, so let's talk. Like, that's not a conversation the landlord is like, expecting to have. So, I would say there's a huge role for nonprofits. The biggest role for nonprofits is, and I don't think I'm telling you, like anything new or anything like that, but the biggest role for nonprofits is to make sure that clients know their rights, know, the resources that they can have to go to those rights, to access those rights, and know and try to get folks in a situation where they can negotiate effectively and protect their needs and their interests. And that is the tricky part, and nonprofits can serve a really valuable role as kind of a go-between between tenants and landlords in those situations, and also as organizers. It's much easier to negotiate as a strong and effective tenant association. And, if you're in a building and you have neighbors who are predominantly low income, probably you're not the only person who hasn't been able to make rent during the pandemic. And, if you have a lot of folks in the same boat as you have a stronger negotiating hand. And and nonprofits can do a wonderful job kind of creating those tenant associations and making sure that, the tenants know their power and know their negotiating power in these situations. And then on the flip side, the other thing that the nonprofits can do as intermediaries is like prep the landlords for this and what's coming and what the landlords will have to deal with if they don't act reasonable. And it's tougher for residential landlords than it is for commercial landlords because, of what I said. Like, a residential landlord is not used to hearing, in New York City is not used to hearing, I was expecting rent, but we got to talk. And, might get a little up in their feelings when they hear it, quite honestly. So I think that, like, the nonprofits, and I've seen this happen, can be very effective in kind of like prepping the landlord for that conversation and prepping them to understand, like, we're all trying to figure it out together, and you're gonna have to negotiate, and it's not going to be the end of the world, and it doesn't have to be a big fight if we all, like, and the tenants are, just protecting their interests and trying to act reasonably in their own, particular interests. And if you can kind of be, get them in that mindset a little bit, I have seen things go a lot smoother and a lot better for tenants when the landlord kind of has got that through their head a little bit earlier than when they haven't. And I've seen nonprofits do that.
The only thing I'd add to that is, I think Community Board 3 and Goals Territory generally, I think, is in a relatively fortunate position relative to other boards in other areas, insofar as because it's a highly segregated and stratified, socially stratified board, there's a lot of tenants in this area that are quite wealthy and are not getting evicted. And then there's a lot that are in regulated housing of some sort, either owned by nonprofits, rent stabilized, or NYCHA, in which, particularly in light of the new rent laws that passed in 2019, there's really not any incentive for many of these landlords to evict. Because it's not like if NYCHA evicts someone, the person making that decision is going to make more money. So nonprofits like goals in boards like Community Board 3 have less ground to cover than in some other neighborhoods, but also are dealing with, I think, landlords that are less incentivized to be unreasonable, although I'm sure some of them will certainly be unreasonable.
So Moses had to jump to another meeting. Megan, do you want to do the last question on this, and then we'll move on in the agenda?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly ask what you thought, like, the single most important factor on attracting more businesses to our neighborhood, particularly to CB3, might be. Like, is it less regulations? Is it better transportation? Is it sort of cleaning up the streets or getting more services for people in need on the streets so it feels safer, or a combo?
Within the control of the community board, or just generally? I'd say generally. I don't think it's great. Quality of life to some degree, but my part of the district is, or the community board is, we got encampments on the street, we got rats on the street, like it's a mess down here. But there's 3 businesses that have opened on my block and the block next door in the past month. So I don't think I think, obviously there's a point at which those things become a huge issue. I think it's regulatory, but really access to capital is the biggest issue, because a lot of the space, particularly the cheaper space in these neighborhoods, is in very old buildings. And these buildings need a lot of work, and most tenants can't afford to move into the brand new space that's being developed in office buildings like the one that Anisha mentioned earlier, or like there's a big office building with vacant retail on the corner of East Broadway and Pike, and your average business is not going to go in a place like that. So I think access to capital and easing the regulatory burden would go a long way.
Right. And they're both tied together anyway. The more regulatory the environment, the more expensive it is, the more capital you need. So
right, and the time is the major consideration. Like we're about to leave to a dry use, but before that we were talking to a wine bar, and the wine bar was basically like, we love the space, it's perfect for us. We could commence our lease in like a year, and that's not good for us. It's not good for the wine bar. So we ended up going with a dry use that could occupy more quickly. But I think a lot of landlords will just, stop talking to that wine bar tenant because they want to try to find someone that can occupy it more quickly, particularly as I think a lot of landlords are realizing that the days of these crazy retail rents are over, and that some stupid tenant or big corporation is not going to come along and rent their dinky space.
I agree. At the end of the day, you need a certificate of occupancy to run a business, and sometimes, especially in our neighborhood with these really old buildings, to get that, or even to get a letter of no objection is could be, a year-long process of clearing up old violations, and the DOB is so backed up.
Yeah, and there's a lot of landlords that aren't even capable of doing that, like particularly below Houston. Like a lot of those, I know a couple landlords that own a bunch of buildings down there that, they're slumlords not on purpose. They're slumlords because they've owned these buildings for a long time and they don't know how to be landlords. And it's really hard for commercial tenants to do deals with those folks.
Anisha just texted me and she got kicked out. So Megan, if you could check and see if she's there. Otherwise, she wanted me to relay that we should move on to the next agenda item soon.
Oh, that's weird. I can't see her. She's
Okay.
not, from what I see, it doesn't look like she's trying to get in. So
Okay.
I'll keep an eye out for her.
Sorry.
Yeah, will you,
Sorry for all these like mix-ups. Go ahead, Megan.
Do you want to text her and just let her know I don't see her in the waiting room?
Yes, I will.
Okay, and I'll move on to the next agenda item then.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Ben, and everyone else. And thank you guys for the time
Ben, thank you for your time.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
The next thing we have is a report from the Arts and Culture Subcommittee, but I think Anisha needs to be here for that.
Okay.
Or no, sorry, that's you.
That's me. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's like,
do you want to wait for
procedure?
Anisha?
I mean, technically you're the vice chair, so could you just fill in for right now?
I don't know if I'm not the vice chair anymore.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I'm secretary, if there's such thing as a committee. So I can't technically chair the committee. But I think you could, Andrea.
Okay, so I just texted her to let her know that she's not coming in, and she said it's fine for me to just go ahead and present.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I think she'll just keep trying. I don't know what's going on. But
if you need an emergency motion, we'll move that Andrea or Megan continue chairing the meeting ad hoc.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's gonna have to be Andrea.
All right, I'll second that. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, she says her internet is literally out, and I know there's been like in our area some weird like blackouts. So that's possible that happened. But
she can call in now. Oh, I see her now.
Okay. Welcome back, Anisha.
If you needed to take a break, you could have just asked.
Sorry about that. My internet is stupid.
All right, so I was just about to go over the meeting from this month for arts and culture. And just, really briefly, I'll go over some of the discussions and the presentations and present you all a resolution for approval. And so we discussed, we had a presentation from Immersive Van Gogh, which is like an installation that's being executed on at Basketball City within CB3. And they had a number of different things to present to us, including an artist residency program, a mural project, and a number of free tickets that are going to be available to CB3 residents. And then we also had the district superintendent, Carrie Chan, come and give a presentation about the state of arts education in CB3. In CB3 schools specifically, and it was a very informative presentation. And we went over a number of issues and areas that could be supported, and a really constructive dialogue. And then we moved into the discussion about the resolution, and I'll share my screen in just a moment, so you all can view it. And oh wait,
I'll make you co-host.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so yeah, the title of the presentation is here. I don't know if it's procedure for me to read it to you all, or if you've read it already.
Since it's short, why don't you go ahead and read it?
Sure. Okay, so the resolution is to support the expansion of culturally responsive arts education in New York City schools. Whereas New York City schools are due to receive approximately $7 billion in federal funds to be spent over the next 2 to 3 years, and more than $530 million in additional state funds next year, rising to $1.3 billion annually over the next 3 years in increased foundation aid. Whereas the draft city budget released by the mayor allocates $2.3 billion to the Department of Education in fiscal year 22, whereas students citywide and in CB3 faced a year of trauma and limited social interaction and emotional isolation. Whereas enrichment opportunities in many schools are often, it says funding, but it's funded through fundraising, through parents associations. Whereas the presence of cultural resources is significantly associated with improved outcomes around health, schooling, and personal security. Whereas in New York City, jobs in the performing arts have declined 72% from September 2019, the sharpest job losses of any industry in the city's economy. Whereas the economic conditions for working artists have been especially precarious, and phased reopening will continue to present numerous hardships for working artists. Whereas a key strength for any cultural sector lies in its ability to create links between related sectors and the ability to capture market dollars in a particular area. Therefore, be it resolved that CB3 supports the establishments of universal after-school programs with enrichment opportunities that prioritize culturally responsive arts education and the enrichment needs of special student bodies such as MLL learners, IEP and ILP learners, and District 75 schools in New York City schools. Be it resolved that CB3 recommends that the Department of Education creates an artist employment program that employs local artists, including cultural venues, and connects them with the needs of district schools. Be it resolved that CB3 recommends that the DOE prioritize the use of increased funding to address the inequities in enrichment programs that are generated through parent association funding. So yeah, that's a resolution that we worked on, and the committee has been very supportive of an increase in workforce opportunities for artists throughout the whole pandemic, and saw a real connection here. So this is what our resolution is about. And Megan has a question. No. Okay, I just saw your hand up. So I see Richard's hand is up.
Several questions. I see billions being thrown around very loosely, and I see a title, Culturally Responsive Arts Education in New York City Schools, and yet the bottom line is to hire artists to a large extent. There's many other things in there. When you scroll down to your therefore be it resolved, I have no idea what MLL learners, IEP and ILP learners are. This is an extremely broad resolution, and I am not comfortable voting for it. I would like to know who drafted it and how it came to be in such short order. This is not something that maybe the Arts Committee has discussed it, but this is really, really fast and really, really big in terms of dollars. I know the federal government and the state are throwing around big bucks to the school system. I think we should be a little cautious in terms of how we approach this. You're going to get accused of throwing money at, I have no idea what, but I am not comfortable with this.
So I'll give my 2 cents on this. The Arts and Culture Committee met at the beginning of this month This was drafted by the committee members. They did research into this and had the school superintendent come and talk to them about this issue. I think that there are some cleanups needed in terms of defining some of the acronyms, and then just like the therefores being in sort of the appropriate language that I think maybe Jim or the office can help with. But I think in terms of content, I mean, I'm not the expert on arts and culture funding, but I think this is, you know, a time when there is going to be sort of unprecedented funding. It's a once in a generation. That's what everybody says. Once in a generation amount of funding for infrastructure for arts and culture, hopefully directed towards arts and culture. So I feel like that's the vantage point that the arts and culture group took on this. Andrea, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, that's pretty much, you hit the nail on the head, Anisha. Thanks.
Okay, two suggestions perhaps. I have no idea where you guys want to go with this. In the title, I would like to take out the words culturally responsive, and in the body of it, down where the therefore be it resolved, instead of just the letters MLL, IEP, et cetera, spell out what those letters mean.
So,
Anisha.
sure. So
Yeah, go ahead.
for Megan, I'll get to you in just a second. I think certainly for the MLL, IEP, and ILEP, Andre, if you could go ahead and make those changes, that would be great. If you could explain what culturally responsive means to you and the committee. I realize that you have it in the title, so it was probably something important. If you would like to explain that, that would be awesome.
Sure. By culturally responsive, we just mean education that is reflective of the cultural backgrounds of the students. And so MLL would be an example of that. It's multilingual learners. So it's just about having education that, and specifically after school programs. And I think that was one of the things that was like with the inequity, is that enrichment programs, you know, like painting, music, and that sort of things, those are generally have been reserved for school communities that are wealthier, because they're, you know, wealthy communities can fundraise for those things. And so that's where the culturally responsive language comes from, and what the background is.
Megan, do you have a question or comment?
Oh, sorry, I'm already unmuted. Yeah, I guess my question was, do you mind scrolling up a little bit, Andrea? Oh, sorry. So, I mean, or scrolling down so I could see more of the therefore. Okay, so I guess my question was, should we be asking for, should we be asking for more funding for for after school program and out of school hours kind of program, or should it be more like within the school day? Because I know that a lot of public schools had to drop their arts education. You know, it's like, whereas they used to get like art class maybe 2 or 3 times a week, and, you know, music a couple times a week, and things like that. That's all kind of gone away because of lack of funding. Is it more important to integrate it within the school day or to provide it as an after school program?
I think the reason why the committee was especially interested in after school is because a lot of working parents, you know, struggle with, you know, securing daycare. The transportation is another issue of, you know, picking up your kids and taking them somewhere else. So I think that's why it was really important, especially, you know, in the wake of the pandemic. It's a sticking point for a lot of families.
Jim.
Sorry, you know, I'm feeling, I guess I you know, I was at the meeting, and I think I I think I must have just missed a little bit of the drafting of this, and usually I help a little bit with some of the like structural questions and issues. So I'm sorry for not being there during that part. But let me make a couple of minor suggestions that might help clarify some of this, and then the committee can move to incorporate them or not. So one thing I think is I would define culturally responsive education in one of the early whereases, and even if it's something that we have to just put a placeholder in now, you could vote to approve as edited. Now, one thing is the turnaround is incredibly fast here because the meeting is tomorrow, but I think that would just kind of resolve one of the tensions, this question of just like, well, what does that mean? If it's just in a quick whereas, it would be helpful. So I think it's a completely reasonable thing to want to support and fund as long as you identify what it means. The other thing I would recommend is it actually seems like the title of the resolution is a lot more narrow than what the therefore clauses are resolving to do. It does seem like this is actually a much broader request for how to use federal recovery dollars, right? And I think that something to that in that direction should be the title, right? It's because there's actually like 4 or 5 or 6 different requests that all have to do with how that money is used locally. So I wonder if clarifying in the title that actually what's to be supported here is like the use of federal dollars. I'm sorry, I'm often bad at doing this on the spot, but just something in the title should speak to the fact that actually what you're saying here is about how to use federal recovery money, not just expanding culturally responsive arts programs.
I think it's to support the use of federal recovery money, whatever it's called, to expand culturally responsive arts education and employ cultural workers.
Yeah, right, because there is that whole jobs creation part of it that is not indicated in the title. Exactly.
So to support, can I just do it directly? Can I change this directly? Okay, all right, I don't know if I need to track the changes or not. Okay, all right. It'd be like the establishment of, we're talking about the federal dollars, right? Sorry, I was a little distracted.
Yeah, I think maybe to support the use of federal recovery funding or something like that. And please, someone should jump in and correct me because I don't know a ton about this. For culturally responsive arts education and
yes.
Anisha, can you remind me of the language you said a minute ago?
She said to support the use of federal recovery
funding
for
culturally responsive arts education and employment of cultural workers in New York City schools.
Thank you.
And then I do think a whereas that defines culturally responsive is a good thing. I don't have a definition of what it means. So maybe we think about that for a second. Alistair, your question or comment?
Sure. Hi. So I have a few little comments. On the whereas, where you say the presence of cultural resources is significantly associated with improved outcomes around health, schooling, and personal security, you should have a citation there, I think, because you're stating.
Yeah, the citation
okay.
is down here.
Can you footnote it so
yeah.
we know which one? The same goes with the next whereas. When you talk about 72%, I just didn't see a number or anything there, so that would make it clearer. Thank you. And then just so I understand this clearly, is the theme here from, I guess, the first paragraph. I guess I have a question from the first where, therefore, sorry, go back, go to the bottom, yeah.
Sorry.
Are you asking for all the funds to be prioritized towards culturally responsive arts education? Or is that what we're asking for here? Or we're asking for some of the funds to be prioritized towards, because I think that's a big ask to say, I mean, if we want to do that, that's fine, but I think that's a big ask to ask that the funds are
No,
prioritized.
I don't think so. And you bring up a good point in that I don't have the like exact proportion of dollars that this would cost with the surplus or the influx of both foundation aid and federal dollars. But I don't think it would, I can't imagine it would cost the entirety of it.
Right. Okay, so I'm not sure, maybe the first therefore needs to be adjusted a little bit. And then on the last one, what does it mean when you say Community Board 3 recommends that the Department of Education prioritizes the use of increased funding to address the inequities in enrichment opportunities that are generated through the Parent Association fundraising? Are you saying that the Parent Association fundraising is causing the inequities?
I mean, partially.
And how does that, just so I'm educated, how does that work? How I just don't know how that, why is the Parent Association fundraising causing the
So it's not the Parent Association fundraising in and of itself. It's the fact that enrichment programs are generally funded by private means through parent associations, and they're not done through, let's say, a government program, so that it makes it universal. So it means that arts education is reserved only for those children whose families are wealthy enough to afford it.
Okay.
So the inequity is in the structure as opposed to the actual
Right.
Okay.
Like,
Okay.
schools don't have the ability to fund these programs, so they rely on parents and external sources to do it, but not all schools have equal access to that.
Okay. I understand what you're saying. There is generally through parent.
I do think though that
Yeah, can we rephrase that a little bit so it's a little bit, the way I read it, I thought it was the parents were causing the issues. The Parent Association was causing the inequities, essentially. At least the way I read it.
Right, I understand what you're saying. Mm-hmm.
So.
Maybe rather than increased funding, prioritizes the use of universalized after school programs. Would that resolve it in some way?
I think so, because the problem is a systemic issue.
Okay, so universalizes.
So you're saying where there is Parent Association funding, you don't have these issues so much, but in schools where the Parent Association is not that strong, you do get these issues popping up
Correct.
with it.
Or they
Okay.
don't have the ability to bring in other resources because the parents aren't as wealthy, or.
Okay. I understand what you're saying now.
And then Andrea, Megan put in the chat definition of culturally responsive.
Got it. I'll add that up there. Okay.
Cool.
Prioritizes use. Okay. I don't know if it makes sense to talk about the inequity here or just state that, I don't know.
I think you should. I think,
Okay.
yeah, sorry to butt in. I do think it's important to say, you know, the issue is that it's addressing an ad hoc.
You're muted.
Sorry. You know, it's addressing what we know to be an ad hoc funding system, right? That when the city was studying segregation and other organizations were studying public school segregation issues, this was cited like over and over again as a main driver of inequality. I do think you should mention it. I don't know exactly how to phrase it.
Okay, got it. Thank you. I'll work on that a little bit, but I saw like more hands up. I think it was like Megan.
No, I just keep on forgetting to put my hand down.
Okay.
So I don't have any, well. I think the first whereas, it talks about the anticipated overall amount of federal funding. And if we could say somewhere in there that like a portion of that, because I think it does to Richard and to Alistair, like it seems like you're asking for the full 1.3 billion annually to be dedicated to this program. And maybe we just make it clear that you are asking this to be a part of the ways that all of that money can be used.
But that would go in the therefore, right?
I think so.
Yeah, okay, all right. Okay, does that resolve that?
You know, one thing you could do, because and this is a kind of style choice, but we do it sometimes, is you know, usually we would have therefore be it resolved and then an additional like therefore be it further resolved for every one of those different points. But you could do something like this. You could say Community Board 3 supports the use of a portion of incoming federal recovery aid for the following, and then bullet out like the establishment of universal after school programs, enrichment opportunities for as culturally responsive arts education, you know, new bullet point, an artist employment program, you know, new bullet point, universalizing after school arts education. I don't know if that makes it more complicated, but we've done that before and it can help organize things a little bit.
Sure, that works. Okay.
So at the top where it says there, or like, therefore be it resolved that Community Board 3 supports the established, or what did you say, Jim, supports the use
I would say like supports using a portion of federal recovery funds for the like that it would say therefore be it resolved Community Board 3 supports not get rid of the establishment, like, or sorry, the establishment thing should go in the bullet point. But this would say supports, yeah, the use exactly a federal recovery fund, or a portion is what we're going to say, right? A portion of federal recovery funds. You know, for the following programs that support culturally responsive education.
or programs.
Yeah.
Where was that?
No, that's fine. Community
Okay.
Board 3 supports the use of a portion of the incoming federal recovery aid for the following programs which support culturally responsive education.
Okay. Okay.
And then just to make it abundantly clear in the beginning thing, like Community Board 3 supports the use of a portion of incoming federal recovery aid. Sorry, go down. The first, therefore, for the following programs which support culturally responsive arts education, just to make, because it's an arts resolution, arts education. Are there any other comments? Maybe did we do one last read through and we'll see if this works for folks.
Cool.
Andre, do you want to read it out loud?
Oh, sure. Okay. So the resolution is to support the use of federal recovery funding for culturally responsive arts education and employment of cultural workers in New York City schools. Whereas New York City schools are due to receive approximately $7 billion in federal funds to be spent over the next 2 to 3 years, and more than $530 million in increased state funds next year, rising to $1.3 billion annually over the next 3 years in increased foundation aid. Whereas culturally responsive arts education is defined as the ability to learn from and relate respectfully with people of your own culture, as well as those from other cultures, according to the National Center for Culturally Responsive Education Systems. Whereas the draft city budget released by the mayor allocates $2.3 billion to the Department of Education in fiscal year 22, whereas students citywide and in CB3 faced a year of trauma and limited social interaction and emotional isolation. Whereas enrichment opportunities in many schools are often through fundraising, are often funded, funded through fundraising through parents associations, whereas the presence of cultural resources is significantly associated with improved outcomes around health, schooling, and personal security. There's a UPenn report about that. Whereas in New York City schools, in New York City, jobs in the performing arts have declined 72% from September 2019, the sharpest job losses of any industry in the city's economy. There's a Center for Urban Future study on that. Whereas the economic conditions for working artists have been especially precarious, and the phased reopening will continue to present numerous hardships for working artists, and whereas a key strength for any cultural sector lies in its ability to create links between related sectors and the ability to capture market dollars in a particular area. Therefore, be it resolved that Community Board 3 supports the use of a portion of the incoming federal recovery aid for the following programs which support culturally responsive arts education. Universal after-school programs with enrichment opportunities that prioritize culturally responsive education and the enrichment needs of special student bodies such as multilingual learners, individualized education programs, and individualized learning plan learners, and District 75 schools in New York City schools. The Department of Education creates an artist employment program that employs local artists, including cultural venues, and connects them with the needs of district schools. The Department of Education prioritizes universalizing after-school arts education programs to address the inequities and enrichment opportunities that are generated through parent association funding.
Is it that are otherwise generated through Parents Association funding?
Yes, good point.
Okay.
All right, I don't have any other comments on this. Anybody else? I do think there are just like, sorry, the feedback. If we could just like make sure it's formatted properly before we send it into the office, that would be great.
Sure. So what does that look like?
I'll send you an example of a
Okay.
of one. There's like semicolons and
Oh,
colons.
got it. Okay, cool. All right, will do.
Okay, we can take a vote on this now, or we can vote on it at the end.
We can vote on it now.
Okay.
Do we have district needs to get through, right?
Well, let's vote it on let's vote on this at the end in the final vote, unless anybody has any objections. We'll very quickly go through the district needs and more just about process. And then we'll do the final vote on everything. Does that sound good? Cool. So Jim, why don't you tell us about this needs?
Yep. Okay. So district needs statement. I'm going to give everyone a brief run through of this. You've heard versions of this before. So the community boards right now in Community Board 3 are starting our participation in the annual budget process for New York City. And you may be hearing a lot about budget right now, increasingly, probably more and more in the coming days in the news as the fiscal year closes in on its ending, or the new fiscal year starts, which is July 1st. But that's actually the budget from last year, right? So what you did last year was the kind of kick off the budget process that is now finally getting approved. So what we're going to be working on now is the beginning of the budget process for fiscal year 2023, which begins in July 2022. So think in the mindset of July 2022. The first step of the process here is preparing the district needs statement. So what is that? It is a document that captures or paints a picture of the community, right? The geography, demographics, socioeconomic conditions, which give rise to needs, and we're going to document unmet needs in the district. Generally, it's not a policy document. Well, it's not a policy document at all. But yeah, that's the way to think about it. You're identifying and assessing needs, not proposing policy. There will be an overall view of the district as a whole at the beginning of the document, which the district office will work on. But then each committee gives a little overview of the sections and particularly focused on kind of the agencies and issues that are in their kind of policy domain, even though this is not a policy document. It tells the story of the district. A lot of not-for-profits will use your district needs statement to, like assess areas of focus or need in the district. So it's not just for the budget process. It has broader implications. Hospitals will look at them when assessing their own funding issues and needs. For process, the board will vote on the entire district needs statement at full board in July. You have to finish revising your section by the end of your July meeting, so they can go into the whole overall document and be voted on at full board. We then submit that to the city. This is a charter mandated responsibility. After we finish the district needs statement, we will then move on as a community board to work on budget priorities, which you shouldn't worry about too much now, but that will continue into the fall. And that's where you can address some of the funding issues that kind of respond to the unmet needs which you identified in the district needs statement. So what we are doing tonight and what every committee is doing this month is looking at last year's district needs statement, and basically just identifying what needs to be changed, what needs to be updated. In terms of statistics and citations, the district office will be hiring, hopefully hiring an intern to just replace and update all those things. So don't worry about outdated stats per se. You should have updated stats and demographics and whatnot for next month's meeting. But for now, we're just going to look at last year's document, try to highlight areas that need to be changed, and then come back next month, either with those changes. A lot of it is going to be because every committee's district needs statement last year was incredibly focused on early pandemic conditions, much of which have changed now, and certainly much of which will be different in July 2022. So I think we need to just highlight all the areas where we can say, this is no longer the condition on the ground, this needs to be updated or just removed. And that's it. And then, don't worry about the demographics and whatnot. We will update that later. You have a shorter section. Historically, you've had a shorter section, so it shouldn't take too long. But if you walked away from tonight identifying changes that need to be made for next month's meeting, that would be perfect. That would be a huge success.
Thanks, Jim. So we can walk through this pretty quickly. Again, we have 2 more meetings to sort of get through language on this. So this is more just to give guidance to really Jim and the district office about what to research for us, or folks that we can invite at the next 2 meetings to give us more information. I think when I look at this sort of first, I think, the framing around COVID should change, just in terms of like, now businesses are reopening, and before it was all about them closing. So that's certainly one. And then I think maybe highlighting like some of the things actually we did hear today from Ben and Moses around, entrepreneurship, like that kind of stuff for small businesses. And, making sure that we're a place where business can happen. Jim, do you want to scroll down, or are there any maybe key points?
Megan's controlling the screen.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Megan, go ahead. Sorry, Jim.
I was just going to say, I agree. I mean, although I think a lot of small businesses have gotten support from the federal government, whether in the form of, low interest loans or the PPPs or whatever. I think a lot of businesses still have closed permanently, and there's a lot of vacancies, and we're going to want to fill those vacancies. So what's going to make that happen as soon as possible? And from my experience, and also from what those 2 speakers said today, the number one thing is the regulatory hurdles. And it's stuff that we were talking about pre-pandemic, how they wanted to, do a business fast track, system. It's just never gotten done. No administration's ever been able to figure out how to get all the agencies into one room to fast track a business actually opening.
Jim?
Yeah, so I just want to flag, just to orient, I think, how everyone should be thinking about this. So from what Megan was saying, right, the need, right, so last year we had said all these businesses are shutting down, and we don't know what the condition will be in a year from now. Well, now they're not shut down by law, right? But they are shut down like permanently. They've gone out of business. So I think the need is, right, is that the condition is that there is a significant increase in vacancy, right, in commercial vacancy as a result of the pandemic. I would say the question of like proposing some kind of regulatory change is kind of getting into policy. You might want to flag that for a future resolution, or just kind of tread carefully around like how you include it in the district needs statement. I mean, it's not, you can kind of get into policy, but just it's not a policy document where you would like expound on that at length.
Right.
Well,
the need is that there are vacancies.
Yeah,
that need to be
I
and-
do think the burden of the regulatory environment, or like
Yes.
easing the, it's not but I like, I
Yeah.
don't think we have a proposal for for how to
Yeah,
solve
well,
it,
that
but-
would be how I'd suggest actually to make it, to rephrase that as a need, right?
Right.
Like there are like excessive regulatory hurdles that, well, that's
Barriers.
a condition that's creating a problem.
Richard.
I was a little, it refocused me when our original speakers were with us, where the fellow who lived down in the Chinatown
Two
bridge
bridges.
area mentioned the number of vacancies that are there. I guess I sort of intuitively knew that, but I lost track of that. But he refocused me. I live in the northern part of the board. I live in what used to be called the Lower East Side, now the East Village. And my perspective is that any vacancies that are here, the mom and pops that used to exist in there are now being rented out to liquor license establishments. So I think that for the purposes of our document, we may want to take, I don't know how we would do this. I'm just offering the thought that instead of broad brushing this to cover Community Board 3, that we use it to fine-tune comments that would deal with the issues in the Chinatown portion of the district, the northern portion of the district, and in the Essex Street portion of the district. Megan could probably comment, about what the difference might be for the needs of that area as opposed to the needs of the other two areas. I know that it'll be extremely difficult to do given the document that we're dealing with, but given the changes that we've gone through, I think it might be at least a good idea to think about the differences that have resulted as a result of the pandemic in terms of our small businesses.
Jim, do we ever do that? Do we separate the district needs by neighborhood within the districts? Within the district?
Some committees have tackled that. I will say, okay, my caveat for anything like this is to consider the like research required to do this. And if I don't know that the district office could do that in a month. If you had board, because, okay, so for example, like Health and Human Services has in the past broken things out with like a focus in a certain geographic area, but they often have, when they do district needs, they often have individual members take on research responsibilities. So that's how they turn around like so many different like nuanced, sections like that. I'm not sure how we would do that. Well, I mean, honestly, I don't even know. Is there updated vacancy data available? I mean, I think this committee would know better than I would. That would be an important first question. Like, what data is there right now? Is any organization doing that research at the moment? Does anyone know?
I think I have the data on bars and restaurants, but let me see where it came from first.
Yeah,
make sure it's not the New York Times or the the Post.
And that's not something that has to get resolved tonight, but it's definitely worth, like if you're going to put that down as something to add, put the caveat that it would be dependent on finding reliable data for that.
I think that makes sense. I think, Richard, your point is well taken, though. I think especially even during the pandemic, what we learned is that certain parts of the district experienced closures disproportionately, so we, if we want to highlight that in some way, so maybe we just try to explore it further and see what data is available for us to use.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay,
you have 2 months, so you could do it like that, and then if it's not fine grained enough, you could do like just district wide. You can settle on district wide if you can't drill down to the individual like sub neighborhood level.
Got it. Was there anything else that anybody sort of saw as a flag? Again, our section is fairly small, so
Well, one of the presenters brought up the need for capital, and that resonated.
okay.
That businesses, in addition to relief on regulations, in order to, if there's a vacant space, you need first month rent, you need security, and then you need money to build out, and you need regulatory relief. So somebody who's just trying to open a business for the first time, or had an online business and now wants brick and mortar, needs access to capital.
Yeah, so we can describe that as a need as well. I think it's just the hurdle or barrier to doing business, to starting a business in the district, expanding a business in the district even. So I feel like those are pretty good points to start with, since it is 8:32, and I think we can close our district needs discussion for tonight, knowing that we have 2 more, and we will try to do some research on the points that we discussed. Our next meeting is actually fairly soon, so we'll see how far we get with that before the next meeting happens. The only other things on the agenda were to do bid and cab updates, which I think we can. I don't know if there were any that happened since the last time we met, but we can certainly wait for next month because it will be a shorter agenda. And also for the agenda for next month will be a sort of report back on the conversation that Andrew and I had with Avima on the special district, and sort of what will be happening going forward in the future there. So with that, I think we can do a roll call vote to approve the arts and culture resolution. And then also we'll move to close the meeting.
Okay, Anisha Stephen,
Yes.
Megan Joy, yes. Alistair Economakis. Alistair, you there? Oh, I see you. Yes, that was a
Yes.
thumbs up.
Sorry,
from
I was having
Alistair.
some issues. Yes.
Andrea Gordillo,
Yes.
Herman Hewitt,
Yes.
David Louis,
Yes.
Alexander Militono's absent. Richard Ropiak,
Abstain on arts and culture, otherwise, yes.
okay. Rodney Washington is absent. Andrew Comey.
Yes.
All right.
All right, great.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. I will see you all tomorrow at the full board meeting.
Okay, bye.
Okay,
Bye.
bye everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you.